"Sign the house and the savings over to me," my wife hissed, "or I'll tell everyone you abused our daughter." We had been married for 31 years. I had built everything we owned with my own hands, trusted her with every account, every deed, every secret. Now she stood 2 feet from a courtroom door, threatening to brand me a monster, to steal it all. And our daughter was smiling beside her, already in on it. What none of them knew was that I had recorded every word she said the night before. This story starts quietly, but won't leave you unchanged. Before we continue, drop a quick comment. Have you ever had to choose between being right and keeping peace? Yes or no? Your voice might be what another listener needs. Quick note. This story contains fictional elements for storytelling and reflection. The heart of it is the lesson. The courthouse hallway was cold marble and fluorescent light, and my wife was whispering a threat that would end our 33-year marriage in a way I had never imagined. At 67, I had spent 33 years believing Lorraine and I had built something unshakable. A marriage, a family, a thriving commercial real estate firm in Chicago. But standing in that courthouse hallway, I knew I had been wrong. Lorraine, my wife of 33 years at 62, stood before me in the kind of tailored suit she wore to close million-dollar deals, but her eyes held something I had never seen directed at me. Calculation. "Sign the transfer papers today, Harold," she said, her voice low and urgent, "or I tell that judge exactly what kind of man you really are." I kept my face neutral, the way I had learned during 20 years as a federal investigator before building our company. "What kind of man is that, Lorraine?" "The kind who made his daughter afraid to be alone with him." She stepped closer, and I caught the scent of her perfume, the same one she had worn since our wedding day. "Sign, or Natasha tells them everything." My daughter Natasha, 35 and always elegant in her mother's image, stood beside Lorraine with her arms crossed, and when she met my eyes, there was no hesitation, no doubt, only the same cold determination I saw in her mother. Behind them, Emmett Fletcher, my son-in-law of 12 years and a quiet man of 37 who ran a small contracting business, stood several feet back, staring at the marble floor as though it might open and swallow him. I slid my hand into my coat pocket and pressed record on my phone. The motion was subtle, practiced. 20 years investigating financial fraud for the SEC and FBI had taught me to document everything. "You want me to sign over my remaining equity in Brennan Holdings," I said slowly, clearly, making sure the phone caught every word. "And if I refuse, you'll accuse me of abuse that never happened." Lorraine's smile was thin. "It's not an accusation if Natasha testifies to what she remembers. Memory is such a complicated thing, Harold. Therapists say trauma can surface years later. How does a marriage of 33 years come to this? A hallway threat. A daughter complicit. A lie weaponized?" I looked at Natasha, searching for some trace of the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during Saturday morning pancake breakfasts. But she was gone. In her place stood a woman I did not recognize. "You have until the hearing," Lorraine said. "Think carefully." She turned and walked toward the courtroom doors, her heels clicking against marble. Natasha followed without a backward glance. Emmett met my eyes for one brief, agonized second before trailing after them. I stood alone in that hallway, phone still recording in my pocket, and felt the architecture of my life crack down the middle. 10 weeks earlier, I had no idea what was coming. The Sunday dinner in mid-January had seemed perfectly normal. Our Lincoln Park brownstone filled with the smell of Lorraine's famous pot roast, winter light slanting through tall windows. Family gathered around the dining room table we had bought together 30 years ago. My 15-year-old grandson, Kieran, tall and lanky with his father's quiet demeanor, looked up from his phone with genuine warmth when I arrived. The only one at that table who still smiled at me like family. "Grandpa, can you help me with my calculus project next week?" he asked, passing me the mashed potatoes. "Of course," I said. Tuesday evening, Lorraine's phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at the screen, and something flickered across her face. Anticipation, maybe, or guilt, before she smoothed it away. "Excuse me," she said, standing. "I need to take this. Client emergency." I watched her walk toward the hallway, phone already pressed to her ear. "On a Sunday evening?" I asked, but she was already gone. Natasha filled the silence with conversation about her architecture firm's latest project. Emmett nodded along, adding occasional comments about construction logistics. Kieran showed me photos of the deck he and his father were building. Everything appeared normal, but Lorraine's phone rang 2 more times during dinner. Each time she excused herself. Her voice dropped to a murmur I could not quite hear. I had spent 2 decades following money trails for the government before building Brennan Holdings into a firm worth $78 million. I knew how to read patterns. I knew how to spot irregularities. And sitting at that dinner table, watching my wife of 33 years disappear into the hallway for the 3rd time, I knew something was wrong. The laugh that drifted back was too warm, too intimate for any client I had ever heard her speak to. "Everything okay?" I asked when she returned, her cheeks slightly flushed. "Fine," she said, cutting her pot roast with precise movements. "Just work." But her hand trembled slightly when she reached for her wine glass. "You learn to trust your instincts when you've spent decades following money trails, and mine were screaming that something was wrong." The way she angled her body away from the table when the phone rang. The way her voice changed, softening into something I had not heard in years. The way she checked the screen even when it was not ringing, as though waiting for something. I told myself I was being paranoid. Marriage required trust. Lorraine was simply stressed about work. The real estate market had been volatile, and she handled most of our client relationships while I managed the financial side. But that night, lying beside her in the darkness of our bedroom, I could not shake the feeling that I was sleeping next to a stranger. Lorraine excused herself for the 3rd time that evening, phone pressed to her ear, voice dropping to a murmur as she disappeared into the hallway. The laugh that drifted back was too warm, too intimate for any client I had ever heard her speak to. I told myself it was nothing, but 20 years as a federal investigator had taught me one thing. Small irregularities are never nothing. I did not know it then, but that dinner was the last normal evening we would ever have. Weeks after that dinner, I was alone in my home office doing what I had done every month for 30 years, reviewing our bank statements, when a single line item stopped my finger mid-scroll. The house was quiet. Lorraine had gone to bed an hour earlier, claiming exhaustion from a long day of client meetings. I sat in the leather chair I had bought when we opened Brennan Holdings, the Chicago skyline glittering through the window behind me, and stared at the screen. Meridian Holdings, LLC. Transfer date, February 21st. Amount, $8,500, marked with a cryptic reference code. I had never heard of Meridian Holdings. My first instinct was to walk upstairs and ask Lorraine about it. 33 years of marriage said there was probably a simple explanation. A new vendor, a consulting fee, some business expense. I had not been briefed on because I handled the financial operations while she managed client relationships. But 20 years as a federal investigator said something else entirely. $8,500. Not large enough to trigger automatic fraud alerts. Not small enough to be petty cash or an accounting error. Exactly the kind of amount someone would use if they were testing whether a transfer would be noticed. I opened a new tab and searched for Meridian Holdings, LLC. The results showed a generic business registration in Delaware, filed the week before. No website. No listed phone number. No physical address beyond a registered agent service. A shell company. You don't spend 2 decades investigating white-collar crime without learning to recognize the signs. And this had all the hallmarks of someone testing the system. The small initial amount. The cryptic reference code. The offshore-friendly Delaware registration with minimal disclosure requirements. The timing, tucked into the routine flow of month-end transactions when accounting departments were least likely to scrutinize individual transfers. This was how embezzlement always started. A test run. A small transfer to see if anyone was watching. I went back through the previous 3 months of statements, searching for similar transactions, found nothing. Checked our business accounts. Nothing there either. Just this one transfer, days ago, sitting in our personal joint account like a small bomb waiting to be noticed. My hands were steady as I screenshot the transaction and saved it to an encrypted folder I created on the spot. Muscle memory from 1,000 fraud investigations. Document everything. Assume nothing. Never alert the target until you have the full picture. Because if this was what I thought it was, if my wife was moving money into shell companies, confronting her now would accomplish nothing except giving her time to cover her tracks, manufacture explanations, destroy evidence. For 30 seconds, I let myself hope I was wrong, that there was some explanation, some innocent reason Lorraine had transferred nearly $9,000 to a company I'd never heard of. Maybe she was planning a surprise. Maybe it was a gift she didn't want me to see before my birthday. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation that would make me feel foolish for suspecting anything. But the phone calls during dinner, the secretive conversations, the way she had been coming to bed later and later, always with her phone in hand, always with explanations that felt just slightly off. The pieces were starting to form a pattern. I checked the time. 11:34 p.m. Lorraine would be asleep by now. I had hours to think, to plan, and to decide what to do next. 20 years of investigations had taught me one rule. Confront without evidence, and you get lies. Confront with evidence, and you get confessions. If I walked upstairs right now and asked her about Meridian Holdings, she would give me an answer. It might even be convincing. But I would never know if it was true, unless I had proof. I opened a private browser window and searched for discrete recording devices. Found a vendor that specialized in equipment for private investigators. Ordered a voice-activated recorder no larger than a USB drive, along with a small camera disguised as a pen. Next day delivery. The confirmation email went to an account Lorraine didn't know existed. If I'm wrong, no one ever knows, I said quietly to the empty room. If I'm right, I'll have everything I need. I looked toward the ceiling, toward the bedroom where my wife slept. Tomorrow morning, I would go downstairs and make coffee the way I always did. I would kiss her on the cheek and ask about her plans for the day. I would smile and nod and act like everything was fine, because that was what investigators did. We observed, we documented, we waited, and we never showed our hand until we knew exactly what cards everyone else was holding. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. 33 years of marriage, a daughter, a grandson. A business we had built together from nothing into something worth $78 million. All of it suddenly felt fragile, like something that could shatter at the slightest pressure. The investigator I had buried 10 years ago when Lorraine asked me to retire woke up that night, and he was coldly, methodically furious. Not at the possibility of betrayal that would come later when I had proof, but at the insult of thinking I wouldn't notice. I had spent 2 decades following money trails that crossed continents. I had built cases that sent CEOs to federal prison. I had tracked financial crimes so complex they required flow charts that covered entire walls, and she thought I wouldn't notice $8,500. The recording device arrived the next afternoon in anonymous packaging. That evening at dinner, I slipped it into my jacket pocket before sitting down, pressed the small button, and smiled at my wife across the table as she told me about her day. Every word she spoke was being captured now, time-stamped, archived, and she had no idea the man across from her was no longer just her husband. Within 2 weeks, I would wish I had never pressed that button. The recorder captured 3 days of ordinary dinner conversations before I woke at 12:47 a.m. to an empty bed, cold sheets where my wife should have been, and the soft murmur of her voice drifting through the cracked balcony door. A voice I had heard for 33 years, but never quite like this. I lay still in the darkness, listening. Lorraine stood on our bedroom balcony in her nightgown, silhouetted against the Chicago night. Phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low but clear in the winter silence, carrying a warmth I had not heard directed at me in years. I know, she said softly. Just a few more weeks and we won't have to hide anymore. I reached slowly for the recording device on my nightstand, activated it, and held it toward the balcony door. Every word would be time-stamped, documented, preserved. He's so focused on the company numbers. He doesn't see anything else, she continued, and there was something almost pitying in her tone. He never has. A pause as the person on the other end spoke. Lorraine laughed quietly, a sound of genuine affection that hit me like a physical blow. I miss you too, she whispered, intimate and unguarded. Tomorrow at the usual place? Another pause. Then, 2 o'clock. I'll tell him I have a client lunch. She ended the call and stood at the railing for a long moment, looking out over the city. When she finally came back inside, I had my eyes closed, breathing steady and deep, the recorder hidden beneath my pillow. She slipped back into bed beside me, and I felt her settle into the sheets with a small, contented sigh. How do you lie next to someone for 33 years and not know they're capable of this kind of deception? Or had the signs always been there? Small betrayals I had chosen not to see because seeing them would have meant acknowledging my marriage was built on something less solid than I believed. I waited until her breathing deepened into sleep, then carried the recorder to my office and connected it to my laptop. Listened to the conversation 3 times, transcribed every word, saved the audio file to my encrypted folder alongside the bank statement showing the transfer to Meridian Holdings. On affair, that was what this was. But affairs did not require shell companies and wire transfers. Affairs were hotels and lies about working late, not Delaware LLCs and cryptic reference codes. Whatever Lorraine was doing, it was more than just sleeping with someone else. It was theft. 2 days later, I stood in the elevator of a downtown office building, watching the floor numbers climb. Simone Laurent's practice occupied a discreet suite in the Loop District. No flashy signage, no corporate branding, just a brass plate by the door that read, Laurent and Associates, Private Legal Services. Simone Laurent, 40 years old, and as sharp as when we had worked together on federal cases a decade ago, met me in her discreet downtown office with the same penetrating gaze I remembered. Her dark hair was shorter now, cut into the professional bob, and she wore a charcoal suit that spoke of success without ostentation. Harold Brennan, she said, standing as her assistant showed me in. 10 years and you finally call. What happened? I sat in the leather chair across from her desk and pulled out the folder I had prepared. Bank statements, transaction records, the audio file on a flash drive. I need you to do what we used to do, I said. Follow the money. But this time it's my money, and I think my wife is stealing it. Simone took the folder without expression, spreading the contents across her desk with practiced efficiency. She listened to 30 seconds of the balcony recording, then stopped it and looked at me. "This is personal," she said quietly. "Are you sure you want me involved?" "I want someone who can find what I'm missing," I replied. "Someone who knows how financial fraud works. Someone who won't hesitate to dig just because the target is sleeping in my bed." The worst part wasn't the affair. It was the ease in her voice, the practiced casualness of her lies. She had called me oblivious to my own wife's face, and the terrible thing was that she was right. I had been so focused on building our company, on securing our financial future, that I had stopped paying attention to the person I was building it with. Simone studied the bank statement, her finger tracing the line showing the transfer to Meridian Holdings. "Shell Company," she said. "Delaware registration, minimal disclosure. Classic setup for moving money quietly." That was my assessment. "You want full forensic accounting? Every transaction, every account, complete financial mapping?" "Everything," I said. "And I need it done without alerting her. She can't know I'm looking." Simone leaned back in her chair, regarding me with an expression that mixed professional interest with something that might have been sympathy. "This won't be quick, Harold. If she's good at hiding it, we're looking at weeks, maybe longer." "Are you sure you want to know?" "I already know enough," I said. "I just need proof. You can't investigate someone you love without accepting that what you find might destroy you both." But I had spent 20 years of my life building cases against people who thought they were too smart to get caught, too careful to leave evidence. If Lorraine was stealing from our company, from our family, she had made one critical miscalculation. She had married someone who knew exactly how to find what she was trying to hide. Simone looked at me across her desk with the same sharp assessment I remembered from a dozen federal cases, then opened a fresh file folder and wrote my wife's name at the top. "If there's something to find, Harold," she said quietly, "we'll find it. But once we start pulling this thread, there's no putting it back." I nodded, and she picked up her pen. Within a week, she would call with news that made the affair seem like the least of my problems. I pulled the thread. Simone started her investigation that same afternoon, and I went home to wait. My daughter stood in my doorway 3 days later, and I knew, before she said a word, that she was about to ask me for money. The kind of desperation was written in every line of her face. Natasha looked thinner than I remembered, shadows under her eyes that makeup could not quite hide. She wore an expensive coat, but the way she clutched her purse suggested someone holding on to something that might slip away. "Dad," she said, stepping inside without the usual kiss on the cheek. "I need to ask you something, and I need you not to ask questions." I led her to my study, closed the door, and waited. She sat on the edge of the leather chair, perched like she might bolt at any moment. "I need to borrow some money, temporarily, just for a few weeks." "How much do you need?" "20,000. The number came out quickly, like she had been practicing. "Maybe 25 to be safe." That was not a temporary cash flow problem. That was serious trouble. "What's this for, Natasha?" "I can't." She stopped, started again. "It's just a temporary thing. I'll pay you back soon, I promise." Her hands twisted in her lap, and I saw my daughter at 7 years old, caught in a lie about broken pottery, unable to meet my eyes. The same tell, 28 years later. "Is Emmett okay?" "He's fine. This isn't about him." "Are you in trouble?" "No. Yes, I just—" Her voice broke slightly. "Please, Dad, can you just trust me?" I gave my daughter the money, knowing I was probably funding whatever trap she was walking into. But what else does a father do? I wrote the check for $25,000, watched her fold it carefully into her wallet, and did not ask another question. She hugged me at the door, quick and tight, and whispered, "Thank you," against my shoulder before leaving. I stood in the doorway and watched her drive away, and thought about how financial desperation makes people do things they would never otherwise consider. how it creates leverage, how someone who knew Natasha was in trouble might use that knowledge to their advantage, someone like her mother. That evening, I sat in my office and pulled up everything I could find about Meridian Holdings LLC. The shell company had been registered recently, Valentine's Day, according to the filing date. The address on file was a P.O. box in the Loop District. No listed phone number, no website, no business filings beyond the basic incorporation documents. I ran the P.O. box number through a reverse lookup and found the physical location. A mail forwarding service 2 blocks from a building I recognized, 2 blocks from the building where Lorraine had mentioned meeting a client last fall. I pulled up my calendar from September, searching for the entry. There, September 17th, Lorraine had texted me saying she was running late because she was meeting someone at that law firm on Madison, the one with the good coffee shop on the first floor. I mapped the address. The coffee shop was in the same building that housed 3 law firms, 2 accounting practices, and a wealth management office. One of those law firms was Crawford & Wolf, attorneys at law. Wolf. I typed the name into the search bar and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Clayton Wolf, attorney at law. Specialization: complex asset restructuring, corporate shells, estate planning. Graduate of Northwestern Law, 15 years of practice, professional headshot showing a man in his early 40s with the kind of smile that probably worked well on juries and vulnerable clients alike. The best con artists don't hide their lies. They normalize them, repeat them casually until they become background noise you stop questioning. And as I scrolled through Clayton Wolf's professional history, I realized Lorraine had been doing exactly that. I found the case buried in legal archives. Wolf had represented a client 3 years earlier in what court documents described as a contentious marital dissolution. The client's spouse had alleged concealment of assets. Wolf's defense strategy had involved establishing multiple offshore entities and LLC structures that made tracing the actual asset ownership nearly impossible. The case had been settled quietly for an undisclosed amount. The spouse had walked away with far less than they had originally claimed. I sat back in my chair and let my mind work through the timeline. Last Thanksgiving, I remembered Lorraine saying something at dinner about the Morrison property deal. She had mentioned the attorney who handled it. That attorney, Clayton Wolf, handled the Morrison property deal so smoothly. I had barely registered the comment. It was the kind of shop talk she brought home all the time. But now I opened a notepad and started writing down every instance I could recall her mentioning that name. September. I'm meeting with that real estate attorney, Clayton Wolf, about the Henderson portfolio. October. Clayton Wolf recommended a different structure for the trust. November. The Thanksgiving comment about Morrison. December. Clayton says the tax implications are better if we... January. I should introduce you to Clayton sometime. He's very sharp. She had been building a foundation, brick by casual brick, so that when his name finally appeared in black and white, I wouldn't think twice. She was preparing me to accept Clayton Wolf as a normal, unremarkable part of our professional landscape. Someone whose involvement in our affairs would seem perfectly natural when the time came. And if she had planned that carefully, if she had spent 8 months conditioning me to hear his name without suspicion, what else had she planned that I hadn't found yet? I opened a new document and typed out every instance I could remember Lorraine mentioning Clayton Wolf. Dinners, car rides, Sunday mornings reading the paper. 7 times in 8 months, each one casual, forgettable, perfectly placed. She had been conditioning me to accept his existence in our world long before I ever knew there was a world to accept him into. And if she had planned that carefully, what else had she planned that I hadn't found yet? The list sat on my desk all night. 7 calculated mentions of a man's name, spread across 8 months like landmines I had walked past without seeing. The morning after I documented every mention of Clayton Wolf's name, I walked into Simone's office and told her I wanted the full audit. Every account, every transfer, every shell company connected to my wife, no matter how long it took or what it cost. Simone looked up from her computer, reading something in my expression that made her close the laptop and give me her complete attention. Full forensic audit, I said, sitting across from her. Not just Meridian Holdings. Everything. Every corporate entity Lorraine has access to, every signature authority, every account she touches. That's going to take time, Simone said carefully. And money. I don't care about either. She studied me for a long moment. A full forensic audit means I pull everything, Harold. Every transaction, every signature, every hidden account. If there's dirt, you'll see all of it. The affair, the money, whatever else she's been hiding. That's exactly what I'm paying you for. I need to know the full scope before I decide how to respond. There's a moment in every investigation when you stop hoping you're wrong and start preparing for what happens when you prove you're right. I had reached that moment somewhere between discovering the shell company and watching my daughter beg me for money she could not explain. Simone pulled out a contract and slid it across the desk. 3 weeks minimum, maybe longer if the trail goes deep. I'll need access to your company's internal systems, authorization to pull bank records, legal clearance to trace any offshore entities. I signed where she indicated. And Harold, she said quietly, once we have this evidence, you can't unknow it. You understand that? Whatever I find, you'll have to decide what to do with it. Criminal charges, divorce, public exposure, all of it becomes real. It's already real, I said. I'm just the last one to know. She took the signed contract and filed it in a folder with my name on the tab. I'll set up secure communication. Everything encrypted. No evidence trail she can intercept. If she's monitoring your accounts or devices, she won't see any of this coming. I stood to leave, then turned back. How bad do you think this is? Simone's expression was professionally neutral. Bad enough that she spent 8 months conditioning you to accept her lawyer's name before you ever knew you needed to question it. People don't plan that carefully unless the stakes are high. I went home and waited. That weekend, I stood in our backyard shooting baskets with Kieran, watching my 15-year-old grandson line up shots with the careful precision he had inherited from his mother. The February air was cold but clear, the kind of afternoon that felt like Chicago winter might eventually surrender to spring. Kieran dribbled the ball, his height finally catching up to his frame, no longer the gangly middle schooler but something closer to the man he would become. "How's school?" I asked, passing him the ball. "Fine. Boring. The usual." He took a shot that bounced off the rim. "Except Mr. Henderson's physics class. That's actually kind of cool." We fell into an easy rhythm. Shoot, rebound, pass, repeat. The kind of comfortable silence that only happens with people you have known their entire lives. I kept shooting baskets with my grandson, while my world quietly disintegrated, because that's what grandfathers do. We pretend everything is fine. We make space for normalcy even when nothing is normal anymore. "Oh yeah," Kieran said suddenly, chasing down a loose ball. "I see Grandma at that Starbucks near school all the time. She's always with this lawyer guy." My hands froze mid-catch. The ball bounced past me toward the fence. "Lawyer?" I kept my voice casual, retrieving the ball. "How do you know he's a lawyer?" Kieran shrugged. The universal teenage gesture of "I don't know, I just know." "I don't know, he just looks like one. Silver hair, fancy suit. They're always sitting in the corner booth, talking real serious. Like business stuff, I guess." Silver hair, expensive suit. I had seen Clayton Wolf's professional photo. The description matched. "When do you see them?" I asked, passing him the ball. I don't know. Tuesdays and Thursdays, usually. That's when I have study hall last period and I go there to do homework. They're there like every Tuesday and Thursday. He took a shot that swished through cleanly. Sometimes she brings him those fancy pastries from that bakery she likes. The one with the almond croissants. Tuesdays and Thursdays. A schedule. Regular enough that my teenage grandson had noticed the pattern without thinking it unusual. Public enough that Lorraine was not bothering to hide from people who would not think to question what they were seeing. My 15-year-old grandson had seen my wife with her lover more times than I wanted to count, sitting in that same corner booth close enough that he could identify the pastries, while I sat in an office 2 miles away reviewing quarterly reports and signing payroll, believing my marriage was solid. "Does she know you see her there?" I asked. "Yeah, sometimes she waves. One time she came over and introduced me to him. Said he was helping with some property deals or something. Seemed nice enough, I guess." She had introduced Clayton Wolfe to Kieran. My wife had brought her lover over to meet our grandson and explained it away as a business relationship, and neither of them had thought twice about it. The ball bounced once, twice, before Kieran caught it and lined up another shot. "Grandma seems happier lately," he said casually. "Like less stressed about work. That's good, right?" "Yeah," I managed. "That's good." Kieran bounced the basketball, completely unaware he had just confirmed my worst suspicion. "They're there like every Tuesday and Thursday," he said, lining up a shot. "Sometimes she brings him those fancy pastries from that bakery she likes." The ball swished through the net, and I realized my wife had been meeting her lover on a schedule, in public, with enough confidence that she didn't care if her own grandson saw. If she was that brazen about the affair, how brazen was she about the money? I spent the next 10 days pretending I did not know my wife met her lover twice a week at a coffee shop my grandson frequented. I smiled. I made conversation. I slept beside her and felt nothing. 10 days after authorizing the full audit, Simone called and asked me to come to her office immediately, and the tone in her voice told me she had found something far worse than I had imagined. I sat across from her desk 30 minutes later, watching her organize a stack of financial reports with the careful precision I remembered from our days building federal cases. "Harold," she said, not meeting my eyes at first, "I need you to prepare yourself. This isn't thousands. It's not even low millions." My hands stayed steady on the arms of the chair. "How much, Simone?" She slid a bound report across the desk. The cover page showed the Brennan Holdings logo and dates spanning the previous 8 months. "Based on what I've found so far, we're looking at approximately $40 million transferred in 8 months. And I'm not done yet." $40 million. The number sat there between us like a live grenade. "Show me," I said. Simone opened the report to a timeline showing wire transfers color-coded by account. The pattern was methodical, professional. Small transfers in August and September, testing the waters. Larger amounts in October through December. Massive movements starting in January, each one routed through multiple accounts before landing in Meridian Holdings LLC and 2 other shell companies I had never heard of. "This isn't opportunistic," Simone said. "This is systematic asset stripping. She's been moving money in carefully calculated amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic fraud alerts, but add up to," she tapped the final figure, $38.7 million as of last week, with 2 more transfers pending that will push it over 40. I scanned the document, my investigator training cataloging every detail. The transfers happened on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the same days Kieran saw them at the coffee shop. The reference codes matched the cryptic format I had seen on that first transfer to Meridian Holdings. "Clayton Wolfe set up the shell companies?" I asked. "Almost certainly. The corporate filings show his law firm as registered agent on all 3 entities. He knows exactly how to structure these to avoid detection." "And the end game?" Simone turned to the last page of the report. Based on the transfer patterns and the corporate structures, I'd estimate she's planning to move the money offshore within the next few weeks. Once it leaves U.S. banking jurisdiction, recovering it becomes exponentially harder. I closed the report and sat back. Nearly $40 million of our company's assets, money we had built together over decades, being systematically stolen by my wife with help from her lover, who happened to be an expert in hiding assets. I want continuous monitoring, I said. Every transaction, every account movement. The moment anything else moves, I need to know. Already set up, Simone said. Harold, with evidence this solid, you could go to the authorities right now, file charges, freeze the accounts, stop her before she can move the money offshore. Not yet, I said. I need to know how deep this goes, what else she's planning. 2 nights later, I sat across from Lorraine at dinner and decided to test exactly how well she had prepared. I was reviewing some accounts today, I said casually, cutting my steak with deliberate care. There were some larger transfers I didn't recognize. New investments? Oh, those are for the Morrison Development restructuring, she said smoothly, without the micro pause that liars need to fabricate details. Clayton Wolf is handling the legal entity formations, all completely standard, about $12 million initially, then another phase in April. It's all in the quarterly projections I sent you last week. She had not sent me any quarterly projections. You learn to spot a liar when you've interrogated hundreds of white-collar criminals, and my wife showed none of the tells. She had rehearsed this, probably with Clayton, probably in that corner booth where my grandson did his homework. You've been distracted lately, she said kindly, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You should take some time off. Maybe we could plan a trip? Somewhere warm. The Caribbean, maybe. She smiled that warm smile I had fallen in love with 33 years ago. Somewhere without cell service or email. Just us. Somewhere outside U.S. jurisdiction, I thought. Somewhere convenient for a woman planning to disappear with $40 million. The recording device in my pocket captured every word, every inflection, every perfectly rehearsed lie. If she had practiced that well, she had also practiced what came next. I declined the Caribbean trip, citing work obligations. Lorraine's smile never wavered. I was under the hood of my car the Saturday after that dinner, trying to lose myself in the simple mechanics of an oil change. When Emmett appeared in the garage doorway, looking like a man who desperately wanted to say something, but didn't have the courage. "Need any help?" he asked, hovering at the threshold like he was afraid to commit to entering. "Sure," I said, not looking up. "Hand me that wrench." He stepped inside, moving with the careful deliberation of someone navigating a minefield. The garage smelled like motor oil and old concrete, familiar and grounding. I had bought this house 30 years ago specifically because it had space for a proper workshop. Emmett passed me the wrench, his hand shaking slightly. "Lorraine's been, really busy with the company stuff lately, huh?" he said, trying for casual and missing by a mile. "Has she?" I kept my focus on the oil filter. I hadn't noticed anything unusual. "Yeah, well, you know how she is with the business." His voice climbed half an octave. Always handling things." I glanced at him. He was staring at the workbench, avoiding my eyes, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Everything okay, Emmett?" "Fine." "Yeah, fine." He shifted his weight from foot to foot. "I just mean you don't need to. She's got it under control. The business stuff. You can trust her to handle it. You learn to read guilt in an interrogation room. It has a particular cadence, a way of avoiding specifics while saying too much, and Emmett was practically broadcasting it. The overemphasis on trust, the nervous energy, the way he kept glancing at the garage door like he wanted an escape route. My son-in-law knew something. "I'm sure she does," I said evenly. "Lorraine's always been good with details." "Right. Exactly." So you don't need to worry. He grabbed a rag and wiped his hands even though he had not touched anything. That's all I wanted to say. You don't need to worry. Telling someone not to worry is what people do when they know there is something to worry about, but cannot bring themselves to say it aloud. Thanks for the reassurance, I said. He left 10 minutes later, having barely helped with anything, looking like a man who had just failed a test he had given himself. I finished the oil change alone, thinking about the particular cowardice it takes to see wrongdoing and choose silence. Emmett knew what Lorraine was doing. Maybe not the full scope. He probably did not know about the missing millions or the shell companies. But he knew something was wrong. And he had decided his own safety mattered more than warning me. I could not even bring myself to be angry at him. Fear makes cowards of good people, and Emmett had always been more good than brave. 3 days later, Simone called me back to her office. There's something else, she said when I sat down. Your daughter Natasha has a problem you might not know about. My stomach tightened. The loan she asked for, how bad is it? Simone slid a financial report across her desk. The header read, Fletcher, Natasha Ann, Credit Analysis. 85,000 in credit card and personal loan debt from a property investment that went south, she said. She bought a condo conversion project 2 years ago, thought she could flip it. The market shifted. She's been carrying the debt ever since, making minimum payments, slowly drowning. I scanned the document. Cash advance after cash advance. Balance transfers. Interest compounding. The timeline showed the debt had started at 40,000 and metastasized over 24 months into something that would take years to escape. My daughter had been drowning financially for 2 years. And I never knew because I had been too busy trusting everyone. Too busy building a company and assuming my family was as solid as the balance sheets. Does Emmett know? I asked. I don't think so. She's been hiding it. Separate credit cards, P.O. box for the statements, payments coming out of an account he doesn't see. The 25,000 I gave her. Bought her maybe 3 months of breathing room, Simone said. But it doesn't solve the underlying problem. She's still underwater with no clear way out. I set down the report and looked out Simone's window at the Chicago skyline. My daughter, drowning in debt she could not admit to anyone. My wife, moving millions through shell companies. My son-in-law, paralyzed by fear into complicit silence. When did Natasha's debt get critical? I asked. Collection notices started arriving in January, Simone said. She's been juggling payments, robbing Peter to pay Paul. The loan you gave her probably saved her from default. January. The same month, Lorraine started moving larger amounts of money. The same month, the shell company transfers accelerated. Lorraine had watched her daughter drowning in debt and, instead of throwing a lifeline, had priced the water. She had looked at her own child's vulnerability and seen opportunity where a mother should have seen family. Lorraine knows about Natasha's debt, I said. It was not a question. Almost certainly, Simone agreed. And if I can find it, she can find it. She has access to all the same databases, maybe more. I stared at the financial report showing Natasha's mounting debt, the timeline of her desperation, and the date she asked me for money. Just 3 weeks before Lorraine's planned asset transfer deadline. My wife hadn't been offering our daughter help. She had been shopping for a co-conspirator, and she had found one drowning in debt with no other way out. The only question left was how much Lorraine had already promised her. I did not have to wait long to find out what Lorraine had promised Natasha. The answer came 2 days later, but not in the form I expected. She waited until we were alone in our bedroom, late evening when the house was quiet, before she slid the folder of legal documents across the nightstand and said with perfect casual warmth, "Sweetheart, I think it's time we simplified our estate planning." I was sitting up in bed reading financial reports, the real ones, the ones showing where our money actually was. I set them aside and took the folder. The documents were professionally prepared, bound with the Crawford and Wolf letterhead visible on every page. Estate transfer and consolidation agreement. Spousal asset protection plan. Corporate succession framework. We're not getting any younger, Lorraine said, settling onto her side of the bed. Clayton Wolf helped me draw these up. Just consolidates everything under one signature for efficiency. Makes things simpler for both of us. I flipped through the pages slowly, reading the sections that mattered. Operational control of Brennan Holdings transferred to Lorraine Brennan, sole managing director. Asset liquidation authority vested in primary trustee. Signature requirements consolidated under single authorization. She thought I didn't know to look for the hidden clauses, the buried control transfers, the ways a document can say one thing in plain English and mean something entirely different in legal terms. But I had spent 2 decades reviewing fraud cases where the entire scheme lived in 3 sentences on page 47 that nobody bothered to read. This transfers operational control of the company to you, I said, keeping my voice neutral. That's more than estate planning. It's just paperwork, honey. She reached over and touched my hand. We both know I handle the day-to-day anyway. This just makes it official, so if anything happens to you, there's no confusion. No probate delays, no legal tangles. Everything stays in the family. The recording device in the drawer 6 inches from my hand captured every word. And the properties? I asked. Same thing. Consolidated ownership. Single signature authority. Simpler tax structure. She squeezed my hand gently. I know you don't like thinking about this stuff, but we have to be responsible. For Natasha's sake, if nothing else. There it was. Natasha's name, dropped casually into the conversation like bait I was supposed to take. I'll need to review this more carefully, I said. These are significant changes. Of course. Take your time. But her smile tightened fractionally. Though Clayton said we should finalize soon for tax purposes, end of month would be ideal. End of month. March 28th was 11 days away. I set the folder on my nightstand. I'll look at it this week. Watching her maintain that mask of loving concern while asking me to sign away everything I'd built was like watching a stage magician. You know it's all tricks, but the performance is so polished you almost want to believe. The gentle touches, the reasonable explanations, the way she framed theft as protection and consolidation as love. 2 days later, I met her at the company office during her lunch hour. She was reviewing quarterly reports when I knocked on her door, looking every bit the competent executive in a tailored suit and reading glasses. The office she had decorated herself, all chrome and glass and expensive art. Have you had a chance to look at the estate documents? She asked, setting down her pen. I sat across from her, the same desk where we had made so many business decisions together over the years. I want to have my own attorney look these over first, I said, apologetic and reasonable. Just to be thorough, you understand. Something flickered across her face, sharp and cold, and nothing like the woman I thought I married. It was there and gone in half a second, but I saw it clearly. Your own attorney? The words came out harder than she intended. Harold, Clayton is one of the best estate lawyers in Chicago. What do you... She caught herself mid-sentence, smoothed her expression, softened her voice. Of course, she said. Take your time. I just want you to feel comfortable. How much time are we talking? I asked. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Well, not too long. A week? These things are time-sensitive for tax purposes. End-of-quarter deadlines, that sort of thing. 1 week. She needed my signature in 1 week. I had already told Simone to expect exactly this pressure. We had rehearsed my responses the way Lorraine had clearly rehearsed hers. I'll do my best, I said. But I'm not signing anything I don't fully understand. That's just common sense. Lorraine's jaw tightened. She stood, walked to the window overlooking the Chicago skyline, her back to me. You know, Harold, sometimes you have to trust the people who love you. Her voice carried an edge I had never heard directed at me before. I've given 33 years to this marriage, this company, this family. The least you could do is trust that I have our best interests at heart. The mask was slipping, not completely. She was too practiced for that. But enough that I could see the calculation underneath. I do trust you, I lied. That's why I want to make sure everything's done right. She turned, and her expression had smoothed back into something approximating warmth. But her shoulders stayed tight. Her hands clasped a fraction too tightly. 1 week, Harold. That's all I'm asking. I nodded and stood to leave. I watched her walk out of the conference room, shoulders tight with barely controlled tension, and pulled out my phone. The text to Simone was simple. She just asked for signatures, pushing hard for 1 week deadline. Whatever she's planning, it happens soon. Within 3 minutes, Simone replied, "Found the transfer date. March 28th. Shell Company has 62 nominals transactions scheduled that day, requiring your wife's signature as sole owner." I had exactly 11 days to stop her. 11 days felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Simone's office smelled like leather and old money, the kind of scent that reassured wealthy clients their secrets were safe. I arrived at 9:47 a.m. on March 17th, cleared the biometric scanner, and rode the elevator to her 8th-floor suite with soundproofed walls overlooking the financial district. 3 manila folders sat on her desk, tabs facing me. February 14th, March 3rd, March 28th. "Everything you suspected is documented," Simone said. "And it's worse than you thought." She opened the first folder. Corporate registration for Meridian Holdings LLC, dated February 14th. Registered agent, Crawford and Wolf. Future primary officer, Lorraine Brennan. "Valentine's Day," Simone said. "While you were probably buying flowers, she was establishing the Shell Company." The second folder showed March 3rd bank transfers. $18 million moved from 3 Brennan Holdings subsidiaries into Meridian Holdings over 48 hours. Small enough from each source to avoid fraud alerts, large enough to test the channels. "Test runs," Simone explained, making sure the channels worked before the main event. I'd reviewed thousands of financial fraud cases during my SEC years. The amateurs always rushed, moved money in single chunks, left obvious trails, panicked when questioned. But Lorraine wasn't an amateur. These folders proved she'd studied embezzlement like a surgeon studies anatomy. Precision, patience, timing over speed. February for setup, March for testing, April for execution. A 3-month runway I'd missed while focusing on her affair with Clayton instead of the financial betrayal happening simultaneously. "This is the kill shot," Simone said, opening the final folder. "Wire transfer authorization forms. Destination: Cayman Islands account under an unfamiliar name. Amount: $62 million. The 18 already moved plus $44 million scheduled for March 27th, 28th. The forms required 1 signature, sole owner of Meridian Holdings, LLC. Once you sign those asset papers making her sole owner, she has 48 hours to execute this before any court can freeze the accounts," Simone explained. She timed it perfectly. How did she know I'd sign? Simone slid across a legal notice addressed to Natasha. Payment demand: $85,000 in fraudulent loans. Deadline: March 30th. Failure meant criminal fraud charges. "She didn't just find your daughter's debt," Simone said quietly. "She manufactured the deadline. Made sure Natasha would be desperate right when she needed you desperate." The brilliance of using Natasha's debt hit me like a blow. Lorraine knew I'd spent 30 years prosecuting people who exploited the vulnerable. She knew I'd view Natasha, despite being 35 and independent, as my daughter first, adult second. The debt wasn't just leverage. It was a character study. Lorraine had profiled me more accurately than any FBI assessment and built her scheme around one truth. I would sacrifice myself to protect my child. She'd bet $62 million on it. Simone slid a calendar across the desk. March 28th circled in red. 11 days. That's how long you have to decide. Stop her now with what we have, or let her get close enough to catch her in the act. I walked to the window, watching Michigan Avenue traffic below. What we have now, could it hold up in court? Maybe, Simone said honestly. But maybe isn't enough against someone with 35 years of practice looking innocent. She'll have explanations. Clayton Wolfe will testify it was legal restructuring. Natasha might back her. We'd fight with circumstantial evidence while she plays wronged wife. Option 2? Let her execute the transfer. Catch her with the money in hand. Prove intent through action, not preparation. I remembered my FBI days. The best cases are when suspects confess through their actions. You don't arrest on suspicion. You arrest on execution. We let her run, I decided. I sign the papers. She thinks she's won. We document every step. When she moves that money, we have her. That's 11 days of pretending you don't know, Simone said carefully. Can you do that? I've been pretending for 4 months. What's 11 more days? There's an exhaustion that comes from living a double life. Not adrenaline-fueled tension, but bone-deep wariness of pretending everything is normal when your world is constructed from lies. For 4 months, I'd played concerned husband while investigating betrayal. Now I'd play cooperative spouse while preparing the trap. The old me, the one who'd interrogated white-collar criminals in windowless rooms, knew this was the only way. You don't stop a methodical criminal by being hasty. You stop them by being more patient, more thorough, more willing to endure the discomfort of waiting. Lorraine thought she'd planned for everything. She hadn't planned for me remembering who I used to be. Then we go operational, Simone said. I'll monitor the accounts 24/7. The second that money moves, we contact the FBI and freeze everything. I turned from the window. And Lorraine learns I didn't forget everything from my old life. I just chose not to use it until now. Simone walked me to the door, her hand briefly touching my shoulder. The first physical contact we'd had in 4 months of professional distance. Be careful, Harold. People who plan this carefully don't react well when the plan falls apart. I stepped into the elevator, watched the doors close on her concerned face. She was right to worry. But she was worried about the wrong person. Lorraine had 11 days to execute a scheme she'd built over 4 months. I had 11 days to dismantle a marriage I'd built over 35 years. The difference was, I knew exactly how much evidence I'd need to destroy her in court. She had no idea I was collecting any. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone showed a text from Lorraine. Dinner tonight? Want to discuss our future? I typed back, our future sounds perfect. Let's celebrate. Because in 11 days, we'd both get exactly the future we'd planned for. Just not the same one. That dinner never happened. Lorraine texted back saying she had a client emergency. I knew where she was going and with whom. I practiced the smile in the bathroom mirror 3 times before it looked natural enough to lie. The morning after my meeting with Simone, I sat alone in my home office at 7:15 a.m. with the 3 manila folders spread across my desk. February 14th, March 3, March 28. The architecture of my wife's betrayal, documented in bank transfers and corporate filings. 11 days until she executed her plan. 11 days for me to play a role I had not performed in a decade. 30 years ago, I went undercover in white-collar crime rings, I said quietly to the empty room. This is just another role, except this time the criminal sleeps in my bed. I pulled out my phone and composed a text to Lorraine, choosing each word carefully. I've been thinking about what you said. Let's sit down and talk through the transfer. I want what's best for our family. Sent. The reply came within 2 minutes. Thank you, sweetheart. This means everything. Clayton Wolf can meet with us Thursday to finalize details. Clayton Wolf. She was already setting up the introduction, bringing her lover into our office under professional pretense. The hardest part of undercover work was always remembering that the people you're fooling think they're fooling you. Lorraine believed I was the oblivious husband, worried about estate planning and family legacy. She had no idea I was documenting every text, every call, building a federal case while she built her exit strategy. Undercover work is theater, where the audience has knives and your script is written in real time. I'd done it for years, sat across from criminals who would have killed me if they knew I was FBI, smiled and nodded, and played my part while wearing a wire. This was the same, except the wire was a recording device in my pocket, and the criminal was the woman I'd loved for 33 years. 2 days later, I sat in the conference room at Brennan Holdings at 2:30 p.m. waiting. Lorraine arrived first, looking polished and professional in a charcoal suit. She squeezed my shoulder as she passed, a gesture of affection that made my skin crawl. Clayton should be here any minute, she said. I really think you'll appreciate his expertise. The door opened, and Clayton Wolf walked in. Clayton Wolf carried himself like someone who'd never been told no. 6'2", navy suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, salt and pepper hair precisely styled, and a handshake that lasted exactly 3 seconds, like he'd read a book on optimal professional contact. Mr. Brennan, he said warmly, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Lorraine speaks very highly of you. I bet she does, I thought. Probably tells you I'm an oblivious fool. Likewise, Mr. Wolf. Lorraine mentioned you'd be helping us with the estate planning. Clayton specializes in complex family asset transfers. Lorraine interjected smoothly. I thought having a neutral third party would make this easier for everyone. Neutral. The word almost made me laugh. We sat at the conference table, Lorraine and Clayton on one side, me on the other. The recording device in my jacket pocket was already running. Clayton opened a leather portfolio and slid documents across the table. Mr. Brennan, I understand these situations are emotionally difficult. My role is purely to ensure the legal framework protects all parties. The man across the table was sleeping with my wife, stealing my fortune, and calling me sir with perfect sincerity. I maintained the calm expression I had practiced in the mirror. I appreciate that, Mr. Wolf. Walk me through the timeline again. I want to understand every step before I sign anything. Clayton's smile never wavered. Of course. The transfer consolidates operational control into a single trust structure, with Mrs. Brennan as primary trustee. It simplifies decision-making and protects assets from probate delays. And the timeline? We'd execute the trust transfer on March 26th or 27th, giving you time to review everything. Once filed, the restructuring takes effect immediately for tax purposes. March 26th or 27th, just in time for the March 28th wire transfer to the Cayman Islands. I asked technical questions about tax implications, signing procedures, revocability clauses. Clayton answered each one smoothly, professionally, without a single tell that he was describing how he and my wife would steal everything I owned. Lorraine watched me carefully, searching for hesitation or suspicion. I gave her nothing but the concerned expression of a husband trying to understand complex legal documents. This is a lot to absorb, I said finally. I'll need a few days to review. Of course, Clayton said, standing. Take whatever time you need. Though from a tax perspective, we'd ideally finalize by the 27th. He extended his hand. I stood and shook it, maintaining eye contact, professional and warm. I smiled at him longer than I would have thought myself capable, imagining his face in a courtroom witness box, long enough to notice every detail, the way he held himself, The expensive cologne, the confidence of someone who thought he'd already won, and the watch. A Patek Philippe Grand Complications, rose gold with a brown leather band. The kind of watch that cost $40,000. The same watch I'd seen Lorraine wrapping in November, tissue paper and a gift box from the boutique on Oak Street. She'd told me it was for Gerald from accounting, his retirement gift after 25 years. After Clayton left, I sat in the empty conference room staring at the chair he'd occupied. That Patek Philippe on his wrist. I'd watched Lorraine wrap it in November, listened to her story about Gerald from accounting retiring. There was no Gerald. The affair wasn't 4 months old. There was no Gerald. The affair wasn't 4 months old. It was at least 6. Which meant every calculation I'd made about her timeline, her planning, her motivation, all of it started earlier than I knew. I called Simone before I left the building. The elevator ride to Simone's office took 38 seconds, and in that time I cycled through every stage of investigative panic I'd taught rookies to avoid. She was waiting when I arrived at 8:45 a.m. the next morning. Coffee already brewed, new documents spread across her conference table. "That watch," I said, not bothering with greetings. I watched her wrap it in November. "The affair is 6 months old minimum. What else did I miss?" Simone gestured to the chair. "I pulled November through February. You're going to want to sit down." I sat. 87 transfers, she said, sliding a spreadsheet across the table. 5 to 10,000 each, all to Clayton Wolf's personal account, not business entities. Starting November 12th, ending February 28th. Total, $183,000. I scanned the dates. Twice a week, like clockwork. Tuesdays and Thursdays. The same days Kieran saw them at the coffee shop. "Hotel reservations," Simone continued, opening another folder. "The Ritz-Carlton, Chicago. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, November through March. Same room, Presidential Suite 847. She had receipts. Room service charges. Champagne and oysters ordered at 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, while I was reviewing quarterly reports at the office 3 blocks away. $180,000, I said. "That's not affair money. That's partnership money." She wasn't just sleeping with him, Harold. She was investing in him. Evidence doesn't care about your feelings. It just accumulates, line by line, until the weight of it crushes whatever hope you had left. The spreadsheet showed a pattern more damning than the affair itself. Lorraine wasn't having a midlife crisis. She was building an exit strategy, financing her lover's participation, creating a financial partnership before the legal one could be dissolved. "There's more," Simone said quietly. "I brought in my FBI contact to verify the evidence chain. This isn't just civil asset protection anymore, Harold. We're looking at wire fraud, conspiracy, possibly RICO, if we can prove ongoing criminal enterprise. The Bureau is interested." The twist hit me cold. Federal criminal investigation. This had escalated beyond divorce and asset recovery into something that could send Lorraine to prison for decades. "They want to build the case?" I asked. "They want to watch and wait. Let her execute the transfer, then freeze everything and file charges. But they need clean evidence, proper chain of custody, documentation that holds up in federal court." Simone moved to her desk and opened her laptop. "I have something else," she said. "Audio from the hotel room. Security system records everything in the presidential suites for liability purposes. My investigator has a contact." She dimmed the office lights, a gesture of privacy I appreciated. "You need to hear this," she said. "Not because it changes the legal case. We already have that. But because you need to understand what you're fighting. Before I let you hear what was actually on those recordings. Are you still with me? Comment A if you think hearing it changes things, Or B, if you'd rather not know. Add one reason so I understand. Please note, what follows contains recreated details for narrative purposes. The message is what matters. Simone pressed play. The audio quality was better than I expected. Clear voices, no static. Lorraine and Clayton. Recorded 3 weeks earlier on a Thursday afternoon. Lorraine's voice. Once we have the money, we can finally start our real life together. No more pretending. Clayton's voice, warm and intimate. March 28th, then we're free. Lorraine, laughing softly. He'll sign. He always does what's best for the family. That's his weakness. He thinks love means sacrifice. There's a difference between suspecting your wife loves someone else and hearing her voice say the words through a speaker while you sit alone in a darkened room. Suspicion is abstract. Audio is concrete. Suspicion leaves room for doubt. Audio removes it. The recording continued. Clayton, what if he doesn't sign? Lorraine. Then Natasha testifies. I already set it up. Her debt, the deadline, everything. He'll choose his daughter over the money. I've known him for 33 years. I know exactly which buttons to push. I sat in the darkness, listening to my wife describe our marriage as a system of exploitable weaknesses, not a partnership, not love. A game where she'd studied the rules and found the cheat codes. The recording played for another 2 minutes. Lorraine telling Clayton she hadn't loved me in years, describing how she'd practiced her concerned wife routine in the mirror, laughing about how easy it was to hide money from someone who trusted you. I haven't loved him in years, Clayton, her voice said through the speaker. This is just finishing what ended a long time ago. Simone stopped the playback. We sat in silence for a long moment. I'm sorry, Harold, she said finally. I know you suspected, but hearing it, how many recordings do you have? 14. Different dates, same suite, all documenting the affair and discussing the money transfer. More than enough for federal conspiracy charges. I went home anyway and sat across the dinner table from the woman whose voice I had just heard planning a future that erased me completely. I smiled. I asked about her day. I already knew she had spent it in a hotel room with her lover, planning to steal everything we had built together. Simone offered to let me stay, said I didn't have to face her tonight. But I had 7 days until March 28th, and the trap only worked if Lorraine believed I suspected nothing, which meant I had to go home, eat dinner, smile at my wife, and pretend I hadn't just heard her describe our marriage as something that ended a long time ago. I went home that night and ate dinner across from Lorraine. We talked about the weather. I smiled when appropriate. The bank alert came through at 11:47 a.m. the next morning, flagged red by Simone's monitoring software. $340,000 exact. I was already at Simone's office reviewing the latest surveillance when her computer chimed. She pulled up the transaction details, and we both stared at the screen. Transfer from Lorraine's personal account. Transfer to Natasha's account. Amount, $340,000. Date, March 23, 2025, 3:17 a.m. Reference, family support. 340 exactly, I said. That's Natasha's debt to the penny. Simone's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up Natasha's financial profile we'd compiled weeks ago. The debt total matched perfectly. $85,000 in credit cards, $120,000 in personal loans, $85,000 in the failed property investment, $40,000 in collection notices. Could be coincidence, Simone said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. Mother helping daughter. 4 days before the transfer deadline? I shook my head. Lorraine doesn't do coincidences. The timestamp caught my eye. 3:17 a.m. Who transfers money at 3 in the morning? Pull the communication records, I said. Last 72 hours, Lorraine and Natasha. Simone opened another window, accessing the phone records and text message logs we'd been monitoring through legal surveillance warrants. The messages loaded chronologically. March 20th, 9:47 p.m. Lorraine to Natasha. We need to talk about your father. Coffee tomorrow? March 21st, 2:15 p.m. Lorraine to Natasha. I can make your problem disappear. All I need is your word that you'll support me if your father becomes difficult. March 21st, 2:43 p.m. Natasha to Lorraine. What are you asking me to do? March 21st, 2:45 p.m. Lorraine to Natasha. Just tell the truth about how controlling he's been. About the financial pressure. Nothing that isn't already true from a certain perspective. March 21st, 3:12 p.m. Natasha to Lorraine. You're asking me to lie about Dad. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from watching your child's phone number appear in evidence files instead of on your contact list. Natasha Fletcher appeared in the text message logs like a ghost of the daughter I remembered. 35 years old, architect by training, and desperate enough to trade her integrity for an escape from $340,000 of debt. The messages continued. March 22nd, 11:23 a.m. Lorraine to Natasha. Think about Kieran. Think about your future. Your father built this company for the family. I'm just protecting our share. March 22nd, 8:34 p.m. Natasha to Lorraine. I need time to think. March 23rd, 3:16 a.m. Lorraine to Natasha. I'm asking you to survive. The money is in your account. What you do with it is your choice. The transfer had happened at 3:17 a.m. The text came 2 minutes later. Lorraine had sent the money before Natasha agreed. Before she could refuse. A fait accompli. Take the money or give it back. But giving it back meant staying in debt, staying desperate, staying vulnerable. She didn't wait for an answer, I said. Simone nodded grimly. Bought her daughter's cooperation by making refusing harder than accepting. When does a father stop protecting his daughter? When she betrays him? Or when protecting her means letting her mother destroy them both? I stared at the messages, watching my daughter's resistance crumble under the weight of financial desperation and maternal manipulation. March 23rd, 7:42 a.m. Natasha to Lorraine. I saw the transfer. March 23rd, 7:43 a.m. Lorraine to Natasha. Now you don't have to worry. Now you can focus on being a mother, a wife. This is what family does. March 23rd, 8:15 a.m. Natasha to Lorraine. What do you need me to say? There it was. The moment my daughter chose money over me. Simone printed the message thread and added it to the growing evidence file. This is witness tampering, bribery, conspiracy to commit perjury. Every text is another charge. I moved to the window, looking out over the city. 4 days until March 28th. 4 days until Lorraine expected me to sign the asset transfer papers, thinking she'd secured Natasha's testimony, thinking she'd isolated me completely. She bought my daughter for $340,000, I said. That's what 35 years of fatherhood is worth. Natasha's desperate, Simone said quietly. People do things when they're cornered. So do I. And I'm more cornered than she knows. Lorraine had built a fortress around the money. But every wall she added gave me another surface to document, another angle to attack. The affair with Clayton, documented. The shell companies, traced. The embezzlement timeline, mapped. And now the witness tampering, captured in text messages with timestamps and bank transfers. There's something else, Simone said. She made a mistake. I turned from the window. By paying Natasha now, before the 28th, she created documented evidence of witness tampering. Any testimony Natasha gives is now legally tainted. A competent attorney will get it thrown out immediately. Lorraine just invalidated her own witness. The irony was sharp. Lorraine's thoroughness, her need to secure every advantage, lock down every detail, had created the very evidence that would destroy her case. She'd been so focused on buying Natasha's cooperation that she'd forgotten the most basic rule of bribery. Don't leave a paper trail. My phone buzzed. Text from Natasha. Dad, can we talk? I need to explain something. 4 days before the transfer, my daughter wanted to explain. I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard, and realized I had no idea what I'd say to her, or whether I'd say anything at all. I didn't answer Natasha's text. Instead, I called her husband. Emmett Fletcher's hands shook enough that coffee sloshed over the rim of his cup onto the table between us. We sat in a downtown coffee shop on March 25th at 3 p.m., far enough from our neighborhood that we wouldn't be recognized. Emmett Fletcher was 37, ran a small contracting business, made decent money, but not enough to ignore $12 million, and had the look of a man who'd chosen comfort over courage so many times he'd forgotten there was ever a choice. I'm not brave like you, Harold, he said, wiping the spilled coffee with a napkin. When Natasha told me what her mother offered, I should have called you. I didn't. You're here now, I said. That counts for something. He looked at me with something between gratitude and despair. She cries every night. The money's in her account, but she can't sleep. She tried to give it back. Give it back? 3 times, Emmett said. She initiated transfers to return the money to your wife. 3 times Lorraine rejected them, sent the money back. Said Natasha needed to keep it, needed to accept that this was how families protected each other. The manipulation was elegant. Lorraine hadn't just bribed Natasha, she'd trapped her, made refusing the money harder than keeping it, turned the act of acceptance into complicity that couldn't be undone. Watching your son-in-law beg for mercy for your daughter who sold you out is a special kind of hell that doesn't have a name. Please don't destroy her in court, Emmett said quietly. Whatever happens with Lorraine, whatever you're planning, please remember Natasha is still your daughter. She made a mistake, but she's drowning in guilt. I looked at the man across from me. Weak, yes. Complicit by silence, certainly, but not malicious. Just terrified of losing his wife, his family, his comfortable life. Tell her she doesn't need to explain anything to me, I said. Tell her to stay quiet, stay out of it, and let this play out. Will you? Emmett hesitated. Will you forgive her? I don't know, I said honestly. Ask me after Friday. I went home that evening to find Lorraine waiting in the living room with the unsigned asset transfer documents spread across the coffee table. 48 hours, Harold, she said without preamble. Sign these or things become very difficult for you and for Natasha. The threat was explicit now. No more casual suggestions about estate planning or family protection. Just raw coercion. I need my attorney to review the language, I said calmly, sitting in the chair across from her. These are complex documents. Your attorney? Her voice hardened. We've been over this. Clayton is one of the best, and I want my own counsel to review them. That's standard practice. Lorraine's jaw tightened. She stood, gathering the papers. You have until Friday morning, she said. After that, I can't protect you from what happens next. Protect me. The word was almost funny. Lorraine thought she was tightening a noose, but every threat she made just added another page to the evidence file. The recording device in my pocket captured her ultimatum, her timeline, her barely veiled threat involving our daughter. I watched her walk upstairs, listened to the bedroom door close, and pulled out my phone to text Simone. She just gave me 48 hours. Pushing hard, we're close. The response came within seconds. Come to office. Found something. Now. I drove to Simone's office at 9:30 p.m. She was waiting with her laptop open, a new file folder labeled Additional Evidence Urgent on the screen. February 19th, she said as I sat down. Text from Lorraine to Natasha. I just found it in the older message archives. She turned the screen toward me. Lorraine to Natasha. February 19th, 10:47 p.m. When this goes to court, I'll need you to support my version of events. 20% of everything for your testimony. That's over $12 million if you're wondering. $12.4 million, I said. She wasn't buying Natasha's silence. She was buying false testimony. And look at the date, Simone pointed out. February. Before she ever asked you to sign anything. Before the March deadline. She wasn't offering this as contingency if you refused. She was planning to use false testimony from the beginning. This isn't just embezzlement anymore, Simone continued. It's conspiracy to commit perjury, witness tampering, wire fraud, federal charges, Harold, multiple counts. She could be looking at 20 years. I stared at the message on the screen. $12 million offered to my daughter to lie about me in court. Not as a backup plan, as the primary strategy. How many federal crimes does someone have to commit before you stop seeing them as your wife and start seeing them as just another criminal you're taking down? The evidence package is complete, Simone said. Embezzlement, affair, conspiracy, witness tampering, perjury solicitation. Everything documented, time-stamped, legally obtained. The FBI is ready to move when you give the word. Tomorrow, I said. Court is at 9 a.m. You're sure? I'm sure. Simone handed me 3 folders. Embezzlement, affair, conspiracy. The complete case against my wife, ready to present. At midnight. I sat in my home office with the 3 folders Simone had prepared spread across my desk. Court started at 9 a.m. 8 hours to review 35 years of marriage reduced to documented crimes. Upstairs, Lorraine slept soundly, probably dreaming about Cayman Islands beaches with Clayton and $62 million. She had no idea that in 8 hours, I'd walk into that courthouse and burn her entire world down. 8 hours passed in what felt like 8 minutes. I didn't sleep. Just sat in my office reviewing evidence, mentally rehearsing the moment when everything I'd built would either be saved or destroyed. Simone arrived at my house at 6 a.m. with 2 cups of coffee and a manila envelope marked, "Final, do not open until court." We sat in my home office as dawn broke over Chicago. The 3 evidence folders spread between us like battle plans. Embezzlement, affair, conspiracy. 35 years of marriage distilled into documentation of betrayal. The FBI has eyes on all accounts, Simone said, opening her laptop. If she tries to move money this morning, we'll know within seconds. She won't, I said, taking the coffee she offered. She thinks she's won. She'll wait until I sign, then execute the transfer this afternoon. Simone pulled up a secure email, turned the screen toward me. Federal warrant came through at midnight. Judge authorized account freeze effective 9 a.m. Every shell company, every offshore account, every entity tied to Lorraine or Clayton Wolf. The transfer window closes before she even gets into that courtroom. The FBI had moved faster than I expected. Lorraine's entire plan was already dead. She just didn't know it yet. All that planning, all that manipulation, all those months of building her exit strategy, and the window had closed while she slept. And if she threatens you one more time in that courthouse hallway, Simone continued, we'll have her on tape committing witness intimidation in a federal building. The prosecutors want that recording. They want her to make one more mistake. I checked the recording device in my coat pocket. Fully charged. Voice activated. Ready. Preparing to destroy your wife in court is like defusing a bomb you built together. Every wire cut used to connect to something you loved. The evidence folders contained 35 years of marriage, reduced to bank statements and hotel receipts and text messages that proved the woman I'd shared my life with had been planning my destruction for months while I slept beside her, oblivious. "You ready?" Simone asked quietly. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." I arrived at Cook County Circuit Court at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the hearing. The hallway was cold marble and fluorescent light, exactly as I'd imagined it would be when this moment finally came. Lorraine stood near the courtroom doors with Natasha and Emmett. She wore the tailored suit she saved for important meetings, the one that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked like a woman going into a business negotiation she knew she'd win. Natasha looked pale, avoiding my eyes. Dark circles suggested she hadn't slept any better than I had. Emmett stared at the floor, shoulders hunched like a man who wished he could be anywhere else. Lorraine saw me and walked over, her heels clicking against marble with precise, confident strikes. "Harold," she said, voice low and urgent, "we need to talk, privately." She pulled me aside, away from Natasha and Emmett, to a quiet corner of the hallway near a water fountain that nobody was using. I slid my hand into my coat pocket and pressed record on my phone. "Last chance," Lorraine said. "Sign the transfer papers today, or I tell that judge exactly what kind of man you really are." I kept my face neutral, the way I'd learned during 20 years as a federal investigator. "What kind of man is that, Lorraine?" "The kind who made his daughter afraid to be alone with him," she said, stepping closer, invading the space between us. "Sign, or Natasha tells them everything." Standing 3 feet from the woman who shared your bed for 35 years, while she threatens to destroy you, feels exactly like drowning in air. I could smell her perfume, the same one she'd worn since our wedding day. Some details don't change even when everything else does. "You'd really have our daughter lie under oath?" I asked, making sure the recording caught every word clearly. "I'd have her tell the truth about a controlling husband," Lorraine said. "About financial abuse, about intimidation, about a man who put business before family for 3 decades. The judge will believe her. Daughters don't lie about their fathers unless there's a reason. Now sign, or we go in there and destroy you." She pulled the asset transfer documents from her briefcase, held them between us like a weapon. "I need more time to review." "No more time," she cut me off sharply. "You sign now, this morning, or Natasha goes on record. The judge will freeze every account you have access to. You'll spend the next 5 years in litigation while I run the company. Is that what you want? And if I sign, then we're done here. The transfer processes this afternoon, and everyone moves on with their lives." Simple. There it was. The transfer processes this afternoon. Confession on tape that she planned to execute the embezzlement within hours of getting my signature. Premeditated wire fraud with a timestamp. "I'll need to read through these one more time," I said. "You have until the judge calls us in," Lorraine said. 10 minutes, Harold. Then I'm done protecting you." She walked back toward Natasha and Emmett. I watched her whisper something to our daughter. Watched Natasha nod, with visible reluctance. Watched my family organize themselves to destroy me. Does it count as betrayal if you saw it coming? Or does that just make you complicit in your own destruction? I looked down at the documents in my hand. Standard Asset Transfer Agreement. Consolidation of ownership under single trustee. Lorraine Brennan, sole managing director of Brennan Holdings. Everything I'd built over 30 years, signed over in a courthouse hallway under threat of false accusations. The recording device in my pocket had captured 18 minutes of federal crimes. Witness intimidation, conspiracy to commit perjury, extortion, and that final confession, the transfer processes this afternoon. A bailiff opened the courtroom doors. "Brennan family matter, Judge Reynolds is ready." Lorraine straightened her suit, gave me one last meaningful look, satisfaction mixed with something that might have been pity, and walked toward the courtroom doors. Natasha trailing behind her like a shadow, Emmett's eyes meeting mine for one apologetic second. I stood in that hallway, holding a phone with 18 minutes of recorded federal crimes, watching my family disappear through courtroom doors. Then I followed them in. The courtroom felt smaller than I remembered from my own legal battles. Judge Margaret Reynolds sat behind the bench with the stillness of someone who'd spent 23 years watching people lie under oath. Her gray eyes moved between the assembled parties like a hawk tracking field mice, sharp, calculating, missing nothing. Lorraine sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a cream-colored suit I'd bought her for our anniversary 3 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Clayton wasn't in the courtroom, too smart to show his face, or maybe Lorraine had insisted he stay away. Her attorney, Gerald Ashford, stood to address the court. Mid-50s, expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, and a practiced courtroom voice that filled the space without seeming to rise in volume. "Your Honor," Ashford began, "my client seeks emergency authorization to transfer marital assets currently frozen by the respondent's financial machinations. Mrs. Brennan has been rendered effectively destitute, while her husband hoards $62 million in accounts she cannot access. She cannot pay for basic necessities, cannot maintain her residence, cannot even afford medical care." Simone rose beside me. "Your Honor, the assets in question are frozen because they represent embezzled funds. We have evidence. Evidence Mrs. Cross will present in due time," Judge Reynolds said. Her voice carried the weight of 2 decades dispensing justice. "Mr. Ashford, continue. How many times had I sat in courtrooms like this during my SEC days, watching judges parse through financial crimes? Now I was on the other side of the table, and the view looked entirely different." Ashford turned to face the gallery as he spoke, playing to an invisible audience. "Mrs. Brennan lives in fear of her husband's controlling behavior. He has weaponized their finances, monitored her movements, and created an environment of psychological abuse that has left her traumatized and desperate for escape." "Your Honor," Simone interrupted, "we have audio evidence that directly contradicts counsel's characterization of my client's behavior." Judge Reynolds leaned forward. "Audio evidence? Recorded yesterday morning in the courthouse hallway. Mrs. Brennan made explicit threats against my client regarding fabrication of abuse allegations." The judge's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. "Play it." Simone pressed a button on her tablet. The courtroom speakers crackled to life, and Lorraine's voice filled the space. The same voice that had whispered she loved me on our wedding day, now dripping with venom. "You think Simone's little evidence folder will save you? I'll tell them you hit me, Harold. I'll tell them you've been abusive for years. Who do you think they'll believe? The wealthy man who controls all the money, or the frightened wife who finally found the courage to leave?" My own response played next. "There are cameras everywhere, Lorraine. There's no evidence of abuse because it never happened. Evidence can be created," her recorded voice said. "A bruise here, a tearful deposition there. The court will eat it up." The recording ended. Silence pressed down on the courtroom like a physical weight. Judge Reynolds's eyes fixed on Lorraine. "Mrs. Brennan, is that your voice?" Lorraine's attorney whispered something urgent in her ear, but before she could respond, the judge spoke again. "Actually, before you answer," Reynolds tilted her head slightly, studying me with new intensity. "Mr. Brennan, you look familiar. Have you appeared in my courtroom before?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "But you may recognize me from the Meridian Technologies case. I was the forensic accountant who testified for the SEC in 2019. Something flickered across her face. Recognition. Maybe respect. the $60 million securities fraud case. You unraveled their entire offshore scheme across 7 jurisdictions. I remember reading the brief. Brilliant work. She looked back at Lorraine, her expression shifting from neutral to skeptical. Interesting. Ashford cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client was clearly speaking out of frustration during an emotional. Your client was threatening to fabricate abuse allegations, Judge Reynolds said flatly. Continue, Mrs. Cross. Simone didn't hesitate. Your Honor, there's more. If you listen to the background of this recording, we've had our audio forensics team enhance it. There's a third voice present during this conversation. She played it again. This time, beneath Lorraine's threats, I heard it. Faint, but unmistakable. A man's voice, urgent and impatient. Make it quick, we need this done today. Clayton Wolf's voice. I'd know it anywhere after listening to those recordings of him planning his future with my wife. Spending my money. Wearing that Patek Philippe I'd indirectly purchased. Can you hear the exact moment a case pivots on its axis? The courtroom went so quiet, I could hear the clerks breathing 3 rows back. Lorraine's face had gone white. Ashford shuffled his papers like a man looking for an escape hatch that didn't exist, his confident courtroom demeanor crumbling. Judge Reynolds sat motionless for 17 seconds. I counted every one. Mrs. Cross, she finally said, her voice carrying the weight of 23 years of courtroom experience. Does your evidence folder contain documentation of who this third party might be? Yes, Your Honor. Clayton Wolf, Mrs. Brennan's romantic partner for the past 6 months. Also the recipient of $12 million in marital funds transferred without my client's knowledge or consent. The judge's knuckles went white where she gripped her gavel. I'm calling federal prosecutors, she said, each word falling like a hammer blow. This proceeding is adjourned pending criminal investigation. Bailiff, Mrs. Brennan is not to leave the jurisdiction. Next, Judge Reynolds set down her phone, looked directly at Simone, and said the words I'd been waiting 4 months to hear. Present your complete evidence. Simone opened her tablet with the calm precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Your Honor, I'll begin with the financial analysis. $62 million moved through a shell company registered February 14, 2025. Mr. Clayton Wolf is listed as legal agent and Mrs. Brennan as primary beneficiary. She projected documents onto the courtroom screen. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, corporate registration forms, all the paper trail I'd spent months assembling. Each line item represented another piece of my marriage dissolving into fraud charges. The funds originated from Mr. Brennan's investment accounts, Simone continued. Transfers occurred in increments designed to avoid automated fraud detection, never more than $9 million in a single transaction. The pattern suggests sophisticated knowledge of banking regulations. Lorraine sat frozen at the plaintiff's table. Gerald Ashford was scribbling notes like a man trying to find a legal lifeboat on a sinking ship. Beyond the financial fraud, Simone said, hotel records show 47 meetings between Mrs. Brennan and Mr. Wolf over 6 months, billed to accounts separate from business expenses. Surveillance footage from the Langham Hotel confirms their relationship began at least 6 months ago, concurrent with the shell company establishment. Judge Reynolds leaned forward, her gray eyes hard as steel. So we have embezzlement, adultery, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Is there more? Yes, Your Honor, significantly more. Simone pulled up another document. My signature appeared on the screen, or rather, something that looked like my signature, but wasn't. I'd spent enough years examining forged documents in SEC cases to recognize the telltale hesitation marks, the slight tremor in the downstroke. There's a specific kind of satisfaction in watching someone's lies get read aloud in a courtroom by a forensic accountant who doesn't care about anyone's feelings, just the numbers. Forensic handwriting analysis confirms Mrs. Brennan forged her husband's signature on preliminary shell company authorization forms in January, Simone said. These documents created false paper trail suggesting Mr. Brennan's approval of the transfers. The forgery was premeditated, designed to provide legal cover if the fraud was discovered. Ashford stood. "Your Honor, these allegations—" "Sit down, Counselor," Judge Reynolds said without looking at him. "Continue, Mrs. Cross." Simone's expression didn't change, but I saw the slight satisfaction in the way she turned to her next exhibit. "The conspiracy extends beyond financial fraud, Your Honor. It involves witness tampering and bribery of a family member." That got Lorraine's attention. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. February 19th of this year, Mrs. Brennan sent a text message to her daughter, Natasha Fletcher, offering financial compensation for testimony supporting false abuse allegations against Mr. Brennan. Simone read from her tablet, each word precise as a scalpel. Text message, February 19th, 11:47 p.m. 20% of everything for your support when this goes to court. $12.4 million. You'll never have to worry about money again. The courtroom went silent. I heard someone in the gallery gasp. Natasha stood up from where she'd been sitting 3 rows back. Her face had gone pale, her hands shaking. "What?" Simone continued reading. February 20th, 2:15 a.m. The $340,000 was just the start, baby. Help me with this, and you'll get your real payday. Harold won't know what hit him. "No," Natasha said, her voice breaking. "No, that's not. You told me you were helping me. You said the money was because you loved me." Lorraine finally spoke, her voice desperate. "Natasha, sweetheart, it's not what it sounds like. Not what it sounds like." Natasha moved down the aisle toward the plaintiff's table, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "You offered me $12 million, $12.4 million. Watching your daughter realize her mother bought her like a witness in a mob trial is the kind of pain that doesn't have a remedy, just aftermath." Emmett appeared beside Natasha, trying to put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook him off. Her eyes were locked on Lorraine with an intensity that made me think of a prosecutor cross-examining a hostile witness. "Was paying my debt a birthday gift or a bribe, Mom?" Natasha's voice rose with each word. "Was I your daughter or your witness?" "Both," Lorraine whispered. "You were both." "The wrong answer." Natasha's face crumpled, then hardened into something I'd never seen before. Pure betrayal mixed with rage. "Your Honor," Simone said quietly, "there's one more relevant detail. Ms. Fletcher kept every text message from her mother detailing the bribe arrangement. She told investigators she felt something was wrong and wanted documentation. She provided those messages to us voluntarily yesterday afternoon." The exit twist landed like a bomb. Lorraine's remaining credibility, whatever shreds still existed, evaporated in that moment. Her own daughter had documented her conspiracy. At what point does a family stop being a family and become just a collection of people who share a last name and a courtroom? Natasha screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed off the oak-paneled walls. "You used me. You were going to make me commit perjury for money." Lorraine's face drained white as her daughter backed away from her like she was toxic. Emmett moved toward Natasha, but she shoved him away, eyes locked on her mother with pure betrayal. Then Lorraine did the one thing I never expected. She looked at me, actually looked at me for the first time all morning. Her eyes were wet, her carefully applied makeup starting to run. She whispered 2 words I barely heard over Natasha's sobbing. "I'm sorry." I did not answer right away. 33 years had trained me to know every version of her face, and this was not one I recognized. Not the calculated warmth she wore for clients, not the rehearsed calm from the recordings. Just a woman who looked, for one unguarded second, like she understood exactly what she had thrown away. Some part of me, the part that had loved her longer than I had hated her, wanted to cross that courtroom and tell her it would be all right. I didn't move. I just held her gaze until she looked away first, and let the silence be my answer. Judge Reynolds's gavel came down 3 times, each strike louder than the last, until the courtroom remembered it was supposed to be silent. "Bailiff," she said, her voice cutting through Natasha's sobbing. "Escort Ms. Fletcher to the hallway. Mr. Fletcher, you may accompany your wife." Emmett wrapped an arm around Natasha's shoulders and guided her toward the doors. Her crying echoed off the marble floors, a sound I knew I'd hear in my nightmares for years. Lorraine sat frozen at the plaintiff's table, her whispered apology still hanging in the air between us. Gerald Ashford leaned close to her, speaking in urgent whispers, but she didn't seem to hear him. Her makeup had run in dark streaks down her cheeks. "This court is in recess while I review what may be the most comprehensive fraud case I've seen in 23 years on this bench," Judge Reynolds said. 10 minutes. The gallery cleared quickly, people desperate to escape the emotional wreckage. Clayton Wolfe conferred nervously with his attorney near the back of the courtroom, his Patek Philippe catching the light as he gestured. The watch I'd indirectly bought him. Simone leaned close, her voice quiet. "She's calling the U.S. attorney. This is going federal." "I know," I said. "That was always the plan. Are you ready for what comes next?" I looked at Lorraine's hunched shoulders, at the way her hands trembled on the table. 35 years of marriage, and I'd never seen her look so small. "I don't think anyone's ever ready for this. There's a specific kind of silence that follows a family destroying itself in public. Not peaceful, just the absence of anyone knowing what to say next." Judge Reynolds returned exactly 10 minutes later, a phone still pressed to her ear. She listened for a moment, nodded, then set it down. Her expression had shifted from judicial neutrality to something harder. "We're back on the record," she said. "I've conferred with the U.S. Attorney's Office regarding the evidence presented today." Ashford stood halfway out of his chair. "Your Honor, if we could request additional time to review." "Sit down, Mr. Ashford. Your client's time for requests has expired." She turned her attention to the full courtroom. "All requested asset transfers are denied. Mrs. Brennan's access to marital accounts is frozen pending federal criminal investigation. The shell company accounts referenced in Mrs. Cross's evidence have already been seized under FBI warrant executed at 9:15 this morning." Lorraine's head snapped up. "What?" "I am referring this matter to the U.S. Attorney for prosecution on charges including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, witness tampering, attempted perjury, and forgery. Mrs. Brennan, you are ordered to surrender your passport to this court immediately. You are considered a flight risk given the offshore accounts and foreign travel records in the evidence package." Simone's hand found mine under the table, squeezed once. Victory, but it tasted like ashes. Judge Reynolds flipped through her notes. "For the record, the FBI contacted my chambers before this hearing even started, based on Mr. Brennan's advance evidence submission filed last week. Federal authorities were already building their case before today's confrontation. Your hallway threat yesterday, Mrs. Brennan, simply provided the final piece of an already constructed prosecution. Winning in court feels like solving a murder, only to discover you're both the detective and the victim." The judge's eyes found mine. "Mr. Brennan, your evidence package is thorough enough that I suspect the prosecutor will thank you personally. In my 2 decades on this bench, I've rarely seen forensic accounting this comprehensive. The SEC trained you well." "Thank you, Your Honor," I managed. "Don't thank me. You did the work." She turned back to Lorraine. "Mrs. Brennan, do you have your passport with you?" Lorraine fumbled in her purse with shaking hands, pulled out the Navy booklet, and handed it to the bailiff, the same passport we'd used for our anniversary trip to Paris 5 years ago, when she'd told me she'd never been happier. "This proceeding is adjourned," Judge Reynolds said. "Mr. Ashford, I suggest you consult with criminal defense counsel for your client. She's going to need it." The gavel came down one final time. The courtroom erupted in controlled chaos. Reporters who'd been sitting in the back rushed for the doors, already typing on their phones. Court security approached Clayton, asking him to remain for questioning. His face went pale. Lorraine stayed seated, staring at nothing while Ashford explained something about federal sentencing guidelines and plea negotiations. I caught fragments: conspiracy charges, potential prison time, asset forfeiture. Simone gathered her files, efficient as always. "You won everything, Harold. Assets protected, criminal prosecution guaranteed, complete victory." "I won a court case," I said. "I lost a family." From the hallway, I heard Natasha's voice, muffled but clear enough. "I can't look at either of them. Not her for doing this, not him for being right. Both the detective and the victim. Both right and ruined." I stood, collected my evidence folders, the ones that had just destroyed my wife, and walked toward the exit. Lorraine looked up as I passed, her eyes meeting mine for a brief second. I saw everything in that glance: regret, anger, shame, and something that might have been love before it died under the weight of $62 million and 6 months of lies. I didn't stop. The hallway stretched ahead of me, lined with framed photographs of distinguished attorneys and judges who'd made their mark on Cook County legal history. I'd walked past them 100 times without really seeing them. But today, one caught my eye. A photograph from 1997, faded but clear. A younger version of myself accepting an award. The plaque readable even at this distance: SEC Investigator of the Year. The same analytical skills I'd used to build my fortune, now weaponized to defend it from my own wife. What do you do when you get everything you fought for and realize it's not enough to fill the hole where your family used to be? I pushed through the courthouse doors into Chicago morning sun, briefcase full of evidence that had just destroyed my wife, protected my fortune, and obliterated my family. 35 years of marriage ended in 90 minutes of testimony. The scorecard was perfect. I'd won the case, saved the money, and lost absolutely everything that mattered. The house felt different when you owned it alone. Every room suddenly too large, every sound suddenly too loud, every victory suddenly meaningless. 3 days had passed since I walked out of that courthouse. 3 days of silence broken only by the refrigerator humming and the heating system clicking on at 6-hour intervals. The spaces Lorraine used to fill, her coffee mug on the counter, her reading glasses on the side table, her voice calling from the kitchen, had become voids I kept walking around, like furniture that wasn't there anymore. Simone called at 4:17 on a gray March afternoon. "U.S. Attorney filed charges this morning," she said without preamble. "Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, attempted extortion, witness tampering, forgery. They're going for maximum sentences." I sat in my home office, the same desk where I'd built the evidence package that destroyed my wife. "How long?" 15 to 20 years federal time if convicted, plus full restitution even though the money never moved. 15 to 20 years. Lorraine was 62 years old. She'd be in her 80s when she got out. If she got out. I waited for satisfaction, for vindication, for the triumph of being proven right. Nothing came. Just the hollow echo of numbers that used to mean something. "There's more," Simone continued. "Clayton Wolfe accepted an immunity deal. Full cooperation in exchange for no prosecution." Of course he did. His testimony revealed something interesting. Lorraine had used similar shell company schemes with 2 previous clients he'd represented over the past decade. Smaller amounts. 7 million in 2018, 4 million in 2021. This wasn't a desperate one-time act, Harold. It was pattern behavior. I closed my eyes. 10 years of marriage while she was already perfecting her embezzlement technique on other people. How long had she been planning to use it on me? Getting exactly what you fought for feels like winning a war and coming home to find your house burned down. The victory's real, but there's nowhere to celebrate it. The prosecutor called it sophisticated long-term criminal enterprise, Simone said. Her sentencing guidelines just got worse. Anything else? My voice sounded flat even to me. Natasha. Simone's tone shifted. Careful now. She cooperated fully with prosecutors, gave them everything. Text messages, recordings Lorraine didn't know existed, details about planning conversations. They're offering probation and community service in exchange. My daughter, wired by my wife to commit perjury, now turning state's witness against her own mother. The family tree had become a diagram of who testified against whom. And prison? I asked. None, if you write a leniency letter. The prosecutor specifically asked. You're the victim. Your word carries weight. One letter from you and Natasha walks away with probation, has to repay the bribe money over 5 years, 100 hours community service. That's it. I thought about Natasha at 7 years old, learning to ride a bike in our driveway. At 14, crying over her first heartbreak. At 23, walking down the aisle to marry Emmett, while I walked beside her, proud father giving away his daughter. At 35, screaming at her mother in a courtroom about whether love had been a birthday gift or a bribe. Tell them I decline, I said. Harold, she made choices. She lives with consequences. Simone was quiet for a long moment. The prosecutor won't be happy. They want the case to look merciful. Then they shouldn't have charged my daughter with conspiracy to commit perjury. She's getting probation either way. Your letter would just make it easier. Nothing about this is easy, Simone. She accepted money to lie under oath. That's not youthful mistake or momentary lapse. It's calculated betrayal. I won't sign a letter pretending otherwise. How many times can you tell yourself you made the right choice before you start wondering if being right was worth being alone? I understand, Simone said, though her voice suggested she didn't. Not really. Anything else you need? No, thank you for the update. Congratulations, Harold, you won. She hung up before I could tell her that congratulations felt like the wrong word for whatever this was. I sat in the home office for another 20 minutes, watching the afternoon light fade through windows Lorraine used to keep perfectly clean. Dust had settled on the sills over the past 3 days. Small things you don't notice until the person who noticed them is gone. Simone said congratulations, like I'd won something worth celebrating. The house is mine. The money is mine. The life I built is protected and preserved and completely fucking empty. I walked through rooms that suddenly felt too large. The living room where we'd hosted Christmas for 30 years. The kitchen where Lorraine had made my coffee every morning. 2 sugars, cream on the side. The dining room where Natasha had announced she was pregnant, where we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, and all the ordinary moments that become extraordinary only after they're gone. All mine now, all mine alone. I spent 30 years investigating criminals. Never occurred to me I'd use those skills to destroy my own family. The master bedroom door stood closed at the end of the hallway. I'd been sleeping in the guest room for 3 days because I couldn't face that space. The bed where Lorraine had slept beside me for 35 years. The closet still full of her clothes. The bathroom counter still holding her perfume bottles. Chanel No. 5, the same scent she'd worn since our wedding day. I'd opened that door once, the morning after the courthouse. The smell hit me like a physical blow. Her perfume, her shampoo, the particular scent of our shared life. I'd closed the door and slept in the guest room instead, unable to face the physical evidence of everything I'd just destroyed to save. The silence in a house you've lived in for 30 years sounds completely different when you realize you'll be hearing it for the rest of your life. Legal victory complete. Assets protected. Criminal prosecution guaranteed. Wife facing 20 years in federal prison. Daughter on probation with our relationship shattered. Emotional recovery hadn't even started. I wasn't sure it ever would. The doorbell rang at 6 p.m., first visitor since the courthouse. I walked to the front door, expecting attorney papers or courier delivery, someone else with documents requiring my signature on the slow dismantling of my marriage. Instead, through the frosted glass, I saw Natasha's silhouette standing on my porch, shifting weight from foot to foot the way she'd done since childhood when nervous. She'd come to say something, and I had no idea if I was ready to hear it. 3 days after, Natasha left my porch in tears. Her husband asked to meet me at the same coffee shop where I'd confronted him weeks earlier. Emmett sat at a corner table with 2 cups already ordered. Black coffee for him, Americano for me. He remembered my drink order from years of family dinners. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said it was important." He wrapped both hands around his cup. "I wanted to thank you for not destroying me when you could have." I took a sip of the Americano, still too hot. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Emmett met my eyes directly. "You had evidence I knew about Lorraine's scheme and stayed silent. You could have given that to prosecutors. You chose not to use it." The coffee shop hummed with morning business. Laptops clicking, espresso machines hissing, conversations blending into white noise. "You weren't the criminal," I said. "You were just weak. There's a difference." He flinched, but didn't look away. "You're right. I was weak. I knew something was wrong and convinced myself it wasn't my business to interfere. I told myself Natasha was an adult making her own choices. She was making those choices based on lies from her mother. I know. I should have protected her from that. Instead, I stayed quiet and let her walk into a federal crime. Watching someone you thought was weak choose strength is like finding out the foundation you dismissed as cracked can actually hold weight after all. "Why are you here, Emmett?" "To tell you I'm fixing what I can." He pulled out his phone, showed me transaction confirmations. I sold my car and cashed out my 401k. 340,000 takes years to repay, but Natasha needs to start fresh without that weight. I'm doing this part. I scrolled through the documents. Early withdrawal penalties, tax implications, liquidation of 15 years of savings. He was destroying his own financial security to rebuild hers. That's a significant sacrifice. It's the bare minimum of what a husband should do. I failed her by staying silent. I won't fail her by letting her carry debt from her mother's crimes. Something in his voice had changed. The uncertainty gone, replaced by quiet determination. "There's something else," Emmett said. "I proposed to Natasha again." "You're already married." I asked her if she'd marry me again. Not the first proposal where I promised to love her, but a new one where I promised to be the man who protects her from her own worst choices instead of enabling them. I asked if she'd let me rebuild our marriage on a different foundation. What did she say? She said yes. We're starting over. Same marriage, different commitment. I found myself nodding. Good. I wanted you to know that someone's trying to build something from this wreckage. He paused. Even if other things can't be rebuilt. We finished our coffee in silence that felt less hostile than it might have weeks earlier. 2 hours later, I sat in my company office while Simone laid out the final accounting. "Every dollar recovered," she said, sliding spreadsheets across the table. "Shell company dissolved. Lorraine's access permanently terminated. Company's solely yours now, completely protected. You won, Harold." I reviewed the numbers with 30 years of practiced precision. Every line item perfect. every account balanced. The business I'd built was secure, profitable, untouchable. Financial security is supposed to be a foundation for life, not a tombstone marking where life used to be. The numbers are perfect, I said. Business is secure, and I go home to an empty house where my wife used to sleep and my daughter won't visit. Simone closed her tablet. You did the right thing. That has to count for something. It does. Just not as much as I thought it would. I signed the final documents transferring everything to my sole ownership. What will you do now? Go home, eat dinner alone, wake up tomorrow and do it again. Harold, I'm fine, Simone. Really, this is what winning looks like. She gathered her files, paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest client I've ever had. Brave or stupid, both probably. Most people would have negotiated. You chose principles. Principles don't keep you warm at night. No, she agreed. But neither does money you let someone steal because you were afraid of being alone. After she left, I sat reviewing everything I'd preserved. The SEC would call this a perfect case. Every dollar recovered, every criminal charged, every asset protected. Textbook financial forensics, resulting in textbook prosecution. My daughter apologized through tears 3 days ago, and I still don't know if I forgave her or just let her leave. The office smelled like old coffee and furniture polish. Framed photos on the walls documented the company's growth. Ribbons cut, contracts signed, milestones celebrated. All mine now. Completely, permanently, legally mine. I'm 67 years old, worth millions, and eating dinner alone for the foreseeable future. That's the math of winning. I opened my desk drawer to file the final documents and found something I'd forgotten was there. A photograph from decades ago, edges yellowed, colors faded. Me, Lorraine, infant Natasha at the Chicago lakefront. All three of us smiling at the camera, Lorraine's hand on my shoulder, Natasha's tiny fist wrapped around my finger. I'd been so focused on preserving the assets that I'd forgotten what the assets were supposed to be for. Building a life worth living. What's the point of winning if you're the only one left standing when the game ends? I locked the office at 6:15, walked to my car in the executive parking spot I'd earned over 30 years. The building was mine. The company was mine. The money was mine. Everything I'd fought for, preserved, defended. I sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes before starting the engine, trying to remember what home felt like, when it wasn't just the place you went to sleep alone. When Natasha showed up at my door again on Thursday afternoon, her first question wasn't an apology. It was an accusation. Why didn't you stop me? I led her to my study, the same room where I'd built the evidence package that destroyed her mother. She sat in the chair across from my desk. You knew what she was doing to me, Natasha said. You could have warned me, stopped me from taking that money. You let me walk into a federal crime. Stopping you would have been enabling, not protecting, I said. You had to choose. I spent 30 years enabling your mother. My silence didn't save her. It made her worse. So you let me destroy myself to teach me a lesson? I let you make a choice and face its consequences. That's not cruelty. That's the only real love left. She looked away, blinking hard. I hated you in that courtroom. When Simone played those text messages and I realized you'd known everything, I hated you. I know. Do you know what the worst part was? Realizing you were right. That I'd let myself become exactly what she wanted, a bought witness. How do you explain to your daughter that letting her fall was the only way to teach her that floors are hard and choices have weight? There's something you should know, Natasha said quietly. I wasn't going to do it. Testify falsely, I mean. I looked up sharply. What? I took the money out of desperation. But when she started coaching me on what to say in court, giving me scripts about your controlling behavior, I couldn't. She met my eyes. That's why her texts got so frantic those last few days. She knew I was backing out. You were going to refuse? I already had. 2 days before the courthouse. I told her I wouldn't lie under oath, that I'd repay the money somehow. She told me I was ungrateful, that I was choosing you over her. Natasha's laugh was bitter. I told her I was choosing not to commit perjury. The relief hit me like a physical weight lifting. My daughter had found her boundary before the court forced one on her. Why didn't you tell the prosecutors? Because I still took the money knowing something was wrong. I made a choice, a bad one, and I'm facing the consequences. She stood, walked to the window. I brought someone with me. He's been wanting to see you. Kieran Fletcher was 15 years old, had his mother's dark eyes and his grandfather's careful way of measuring things twice before committing, and represented the one piece of my family that hadn't been touched by betrayal yet. He stood in my garage examining the old bookshelf I'd been meaning to repair, running his fingers along the split wood. Mom says you used to build things with her when she was little, he said. I did. I pulled out my toolbox, handed him a screwdriver. Taught her about measuring twice, cutting once. Wish I'd taught her more about consequences. We worked in comfortable silence. He held boards while I drilled new holes, passed me screws when I needed them, asked intelligent questions about load-bearing joints. She's teaching me now, Kieran said eventually. About consequences, I mean. Says bad choices hurt even when you're sorry. I looked at my grandson. Really looked at him. He knew his family had imploded, knew his grandmother was facing prison. But he was here, in my garage, helping fix broken furniture like maybe other broken things could be repaired too. Rebuilding a relationship is like repairing broken furniture. You can't use the same joints that failed the first time and expect different results. Your mom's right, I said. Being sorry doesn't erase what happened, but it's where you start. Are you sorry for what happened to Grandma Lorraine? The question stopped me. Was I sorry for exposing her crimes, for standing in that hallway recording her threats, for presenting evidence that sent her toward 20 years in prison? I'm sorry she made the choices she made, I said carefully. I'm not sorry I told the truth about them. He nodded like that made perfect sense, tightened the final screw, and tested the shelf's stability. It'll hold now. Yes, I agreed. It will. That evening, alone in my study, I thought about the complete journey. From trusting husband who'd enabled dysfunction for 3 decades to the man who'd chosen accountability over comfort. People ask if I'd do it differently. Warn Natasha earlier, confront Lorraine before it escalated, avoid the courthouse entirely. The answer is no. Love without boundaries isn't protection, it's permission. I gave Lorraine permission for 33 years. I almost gave Natasha permission too, but that courthouse hallway changed everything. I realize now what I hadn't understood at the time. Natasha had been there that morning. She'd watched her mother threaten to fabricate abuse allegations, heard the cruelty in Lorraine's voice, seen the woman she'd trusted reveal herself as someone willing to destroy me with lies. That moment broke the manipulation more effectively than any evidence I could have presented. My recorded proof just confirmed what Natasha had already seen. I'm 67 years old, and it took destroying my marriage to learn what I should have known at 30. Protecting someone from consequences isn't love. It's cowardice disguised as compassion. If someone you love is making terrible choices, your silence won't save them. It'll just make you complicit in their destruction. I learned that in a courthouse hallway, holding a phone that recorded my wife threatening to destroy me. Sometimes love means standing witness to the truth, even when the truth destroys everything you built together. 6 months from now, Lorraine will be sentenced. Natasha will be halfway through probation. Kieran will help me build a garden bench where Lorraine used to plant roses. I'll still be alone, still be sleeping in the guest room, still be carrying the weight of 35 years that ended in 90 minutes of courtroom testimony. But I'll be standing. And sometimes, after everything burns down, standing is enough. And to you listening to my story, remember this: winning in court doesn't mean you won what matters. Looking back, I don't regret exposing the truth. But I wish I'd learned earlier that love without boundaries isn't protection, it's permission. I enabled Lorraine for 33 years, thinking silence was kindness. Don't make my mistake. If someone you love is making destructive choices, your silence won't save them. It just makes you complicit in their downfall. This isn't a revenge story about getting even. It's about protecting what you built and setting boundaries before it's too late. I learned that being right sometimes costs you everything, but being wrong costs you yourself. I believe God put me through this trial to teach me that protecting someone from consequences isn't love. It's cowardice disguised as compassion. The hardest lesson: sometimes the people you save need to be saved from their own choices, not rescued from the results. A revenge story focuses on destruction. My story became about preservation, of integrity, accountability, and the truth. What do you think? Was I right to let my daughter face consequences? Or should I have protected her differently? Drop a comment and let me know. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear about boundaries and accountability. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Channel Name for more real stories about family, betrayal, and hard-won wisdom. Thank you for staying until the very end. As a final note, this story contains fictionalized elements added for reflection and storytelling. What I hope you take away is the lesson about love,